Good evening and welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm Rick Morelli. Tonight on our show, we're going to be speaking with someone who has over 19 years of security experience inside the Hazleton Area School District. He has experience with working with gangs. He also has law enforcement. Tonight our guest is Mr. Vinny Zola, now retired Director of Security in the Hazleton Area School District. With me tonight as well, my co-host, Dr. Dave Sosar, and Mike DeCosmo could not make it. He is out doing taxes. But Vinny, good to see you tonight, and we appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation to come.
I'm really happy that you're here. We talked before the show because there are many times over the years when you were, now that you're retired, but you were Director of Security, and it's tough to be in that position and to come on a show like this and to be open and talk about things. But now the fact that you're retired after 19 years of security, as well as again previous, you were in law enforcement. That's so correct. You obviously have a lot of experience to be able to share with the public. And we appreciate you coming on here. One of the first things I want to talk about with the school district is, talk about in general security. When you started, where was it? Where is it now? We want to talk about where the positives are, where it could get better.
Okay. Boy, if you think back to when I started in security, there was one security officer in the entire district, and it was a person who was hired through a detective agency. They would put a person in the building, and that person would follow the direction of normally the principal. So when I first started over 18 years ago, it'll be almost 19 in May, and started to look at it. The first thing we did was we did a security survey. We went through, I went through the district looking at the physical security, the buildings, the security for students and staff, and started to put together a checklist, what was good, what was bad. And from there, we began to develop our security department.
And it's amazing. I'm thinking about the numbers. It sounds like 20 years ago, but that was the beginning of when the schools merged.
Yes.
So when the Hazleton Area High School first started, and you're telling us that back then we had one person security, so still a very large school district at the time.
Yes.
So that's interesting, Dave.
You know what? And the funny part is how times have changed and the world around us has changed too, the unfortunate part. Because I can remember, we never thought of many of the things that happen as you read stories of schools across the state and across the country now, needing of metal detectors, the cameras, the lock boxes. I don't know if they're still around yet. If students know that they have something that they shouldn't, that they can drop it off and I'm done with it. I don't want this knife. I don't want this box cut. I don't want whatever. The buddy box. If you could, I don't think there was a camera in a school when you started back then. You might want to discuss a little bit of the layers that we've been really working on to try to make sure that the schools are continued to be as safe as they were back in the, as we say, the good old days.
I could remember when I did my first security walkthrough of the buildings, and I would go to buildings like Locust Street and A.D. Thomas, and the alarm box would be right as you walked in one of the doors. There would be a box that you would turn the alarm off and on. And in every building, the number would be written right on the alarm box. So anyone that would come in, and because what I was told, maintenance and that would say, well, we don't remember the number, so it's right there. Anyone that comes in can just plug the number in. Then what was the sense of having the building alarmed if you wrote the number right on the box? Yeah. And simple things like that, we began changing, And boy, if I had a dime for every time someone told me, we've been doing this for 30 years. Who are you? Yeah. We did this for the last 30 years. Why are we going to change now? Yeah. And, we were just very fortunate that we started our changes when we did, because we headed off tragedies like Columbine. We were so far ahead of the game by that time that, other places started to look at us and say, hey, we're going to use you as a role as best policies, best practices type of thing.
Yeah, and I will say that, and I've always defended the security, I do think that the Hazleton Area School District, when it came to security, was proactive rather than reactive,
Yes.
and that's one of the things. But I remember being on the board, Vinny, and in all due respect, you were many times the bad guy, and because in security, you have this position that you are out to do what you feel is the best to protect the students, the public, and therefore sometimes decisions that you are making, professional decisions, are those decisions in the best interest. Maybe tough, maybe sometimes hard for people to deal with, maybe they have to go out of their way to do things, and therefore they didn't want to do things. But at the end of the day, being proactive and taking that extra precaution was something that, sometimes you took heat for, but probably prevented a lot of different things from happening as well.
Can you imagine yourself coming into a school district of 1,000 employees and a number of students and everything from professional employees, principals, all the way down through the maintenance personnel and that, who looked at you as an outsider, someone who was coming in to change things and take power away from them, and that was the biggest thing. I can remember arguments with many a principal in that over locking doors, something as simple as locking doors, and again, it would be, we've never had to lock doors, now all of a sudden, you want that. Well, and it took years and years to get that across, that it was necessary. And I got to be honest, if it wasn't for the superintendent at that time, Dr. Shepherdson, who at first, rejected the idea of security. When I walked into her office the first day, she said to me, well, you're here, do what you have to do, she said, but I don't support it. And she said, let me take you to your office. And she walked me down a long hall, and she brought me to the mail room. And Janice Throne was the mail clerk at the time in the old administration building. And she looked around, and she went over and she pulled one of those old wooden chairs, and she put it up against the wall. She said, there's your office. and turned around and walked away. And I sat down and I thought, oh my God, where do I start, But, over time, as I started to produce things like surveys of our schools and needs, Dr. Shepherdson bought into it, and without that support, we probably wouldn't have lasted as long as we have.
But you know what? One of the things that, and this is the outsider. This is the naive person who thinks he or she knows what they're talking about. When I started teaching, more years ago than we care to think about at this point, especially when I was student teaching, I was in Center City, Philadelphia. And the schools had at that time 2 police officers per school. And if you were a larger school, they would also bring in a police dog. That was your security.
Yep.
And that was supposed to make everybody feel safe and secure. And I'm still sure you hear that to this day. Where's the police officer? Put a uniformed police officer. Put a police officer with the gun in the school and everything will be okay. The number of programs that you really have to watch what's going on, to be proactive in terms of, again, the world we live in today, which is certainly different than it was back in the 70s. You have to be prepared, and you have to have so many different, the policies that you've put into place from when you started to where you are right now have to be bound in books at this point.
Yeah. You talk about that, the need for individual people doing certain jobs. And when I first got hired, I went down to the complex, to the high school complex, and I would see Mr. Mussolini, who was a great principal, outside with Mr. Veet and a number of other people, and they were trying to do something that they weren't trained to do, direct traffic or keep things moving, and that's the key. People are trained to do specific jobs. Educators are trained to teach. Security is trained to be observant. Rick, if you and I are standing on the corner, I'm looking at things entirely different than you are, because as a former police officer and being in security for so long, I'm looking for, why is that car there? How many people are in a vehicle? How many times did that vehicle pass here? Why are there students hanging out by that tree over there when they should be over here? And they're the things I'm looking at. Other people, such as educators, may be thinking about, boy, I got to get in. We're doing testing today. You know, I need to get, I have to make sure that I have substitutes for all the classrooms. So that was the importance of saying to them, look, you as a principal should not be out here worrying about traffic control and getting the buses in. You need to be inside preparing for the day. That's our role.
Right.
And we took that over, and you can see the difference. Yep. I mean, if you go past the high school today, there's traffic cones, there's crosswalk areas, signs posted, you know, that there is a crosswalk and what people need to do. And that's all there for the safety of our kids.
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit, if I'm standing next to you, I'll be looking at who I know, waving, saying hi and all that. Right. So I'm definitely not looking at the same thing as you are.
Exactly.
But one of the things, though, that I think a lot of the public is not aware of, that, you know, this Hazleton Area School District is now the 16th largest school district in the state of PA out of 500. Budget is somewhere around $120 million. The security's budget is still wavering around that 1%. And that was one of the things that always bothered me was, you know, when the time comes for budgets, which we talk about each and every year, it's, well, let's look at security, you know, what I hate about budgets is they say, well, let's cut 5% across the board. And I think that's so unfair and just so, you know, it's just the wrong way to budget things, because security, you can't compare security to other things, and especially in times where we have more gangs, we have more things that we have to be careful of that we didn't have in the past. You just can't cut out. And you know, when you look at 1%, I mean, somebody will say, wow, we have $1 million.
Yep.
Put in perspective, it's 1%.
That's right.
And so it's not a lot, and therefore, again, talk about what can be done more, what needs to be. You know, we had metal detectors, okay, probably very successful. Mm-hmm. Police officers, talk about that. What are some of the things that are working? What are some of the things that we could get better at? Okay.
I'm going to just step back to say what you're talking about when budget time rolls around and all of that. That's what I like to call politricks. Mm-hmm. You know, it's where a politician turns around and uses something like the budget for a private agenda. Mm-hmm. You know, so, well, we don't like Vinny Zola. He you know, he tells us where it's at committee meetings, and, you know, maybe we can't direct him the way we want to in that. So let's threaten to cut his budget, or let's cut his budget and make it work harder. And that's the politricks of the district. Mm-hmm. You could sit and watch it. Maybe one year it's technology, maybe another year it's the nursing program, maybe it's the teaching, you know, if they want teachers to take a cut, you know, maybe it's teachers. And so that's politricks. Mm-hmm. And they play that all the time. Would you say that if I was still employed there? No. Okay. But I'm telling you now, that's the game. That's the politricks game. And they can dangle you, because once you squeeze off the lifeline, which is money, it makes your job more difficult, if not impossible.
And you're almost setting yourself up to fail.
That's exactly correct. You're setting yourself up to fail. Yeah. But what we did over the years in cameras, you know, let's face it, the high school probably has maybe 30 cameras right now. Mm-hmm. You know, that's like 30 sets of eyes, constantly working. I can't tell you how many incidents were resolved, prevented by having those cameras there. And by having one person in that office who had other responsibilities but was also monitoring cameras, was able to prevent fights, was able to prevent drug deals from occurring, was able to prevent thefts from occurring simply by having that. And if something did happen, a theft in the cafeteria, mm-hmm. a theft in the building, we were able to go back to a camera, pull it up, and have evidence now to take to court with us. Yep. So we did that in every building. You know, and we were lucky because Project 2000 came along and there was money available, and we were lucky because we were able to build that into the schools. Yep. But key control. There was no such thing as key control. Yep. When I got hired, you wanted keys? What did they do? Here, go to Frank's. Yeah. They would hand you a key and tell you, go down and get keys. So what would you do? Most people would go down, I'm going to get 2 made, or I'm going to get 3 made. Yeah. You know, and they would come back and they would give the person back their key, but now there would be 2 or 3 other keys out there. So when a teacher went from one class to another, maybe from year to year changing, those keys never got turned back in. Yeah. So eventually, there were keys all over the place. Saturday, I get a call from our alarm company in the very beginning. You need to go up to the junior high school. We think we hear somebody playing basketball at the junior high school, the castle. I drive up in the morning, bright and early in the morning. I go in, sure enough, there's a full-fledged basketball game going on. I stopped and I said, well, who's in charge? individual raised his hand. He came over. He said, "I am. What's up? What can I do for you?" I said, "Who are you? What are you doing?" "Oh, I was a coach for the team here a couple of years ago. I had a key. It was so snowy and that this morning we decided to call some guys and have a basketball game." And that was looked upon as okay to do that.
Right.
You know, so those are the things we had to change.
And these are some of the things that still need to change. We're just going to stop right there. Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Inside Scoop. We're here with Vinny Zola, former director of the of security of the Hazleton Area School District. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Inside Scoop. We are here with the former security director of the Hazleton Area School District, Mr. Vinny Zola. Vinny, let's talk about the keys to having a successful security program in the school district. What's needed, what needs to be kept out, and then we're going to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the gangs that are out there.
Okay. I think one of the main things in running a security department in a school district is that it needs to be a separate entity. It needs to have one person in charge of it who answers maybe to the superintendent, and then the rest of the department falls under the head of security. Why? You might ask why would we want to do that? Well, you need to be able to make sure that your security officers are doing their job without fear of reprisal. If they have to answer to the security director, the principal of the building, the assistant, superintendent, and everyone else, they start to lose that chain of command. And chain of command is very important in any type of military or law enforcement or security. There needs to be a chain of command. So that security officer, although maybe the security officer works at Heights Terrace Elementary School, they answer directly to one person and only one person. That way we can eliminate the need for, let's say we need to change that person's location, which should be done every year, by the way. Security officers should rotate buildings every year. One, they would become familiar with every building in the district, and in a major emergency, that's important. Two is they don't build bonds or friendships with people, and then those bonds may have a tendency to stop them from doing an investigation in the proper way. It's human nature. It happens that way. So I think that's one of the main things. The other thing is the board. Over the years, I've had to deal with a lot of boards. Rick, you were on. Mike DeCosmo, one of your hosts, was on. And, boards can interfere without even realizing that they're interfering. If an employee is able to call a board member and make a complaint about their boss or the way things are going, and that board member directly gets involved in it, it changes the whole dynamics. All of a sudden, that employee becomes powerful in that setting. And once you start to hinder the way a job can be done, you're on the way down. And really and truthfully, that happened in the Hazleton Area School District over the last 5 years.
If you recall, when I was on the board, I walked in on 4 board members who were sitting down with a person who was interviewing for a head job who did not get that job and was then complaining. So
yes,
if you recall that.
Yes. Yep.
So,
absolutely.
Yep.
And I see it, this year, I think, or the last 2 years, it got to a point where it actually hindered being able to run security operations properly. Yep. And which actually led to me saying, you know what, if I can't do my job, then there's no sense in being here. So I think that's another thing. I think board members have to really step away from that element. Hey, we have great superintendents. I mean, let's face it, Dr. Antonelli's a super individual, great superintendent. Let him do his job. Yep. Let him supervise the director of security and run, let the department run the way it should. You want to talk about gangs. When gangs first came to our area and we noticed them, the security was the first to notice them in the district, Dave. If you remember, we brought it up at a board meeting. Rick, you were at the board meeting, and one of the board members said, "You're out of your mind. There are no gangs in the Hazleton Area School District." Do you remember that, Rick?
I do.
You are out of your mind. There are no gangs. You're just trying to protect your job.
Yeah.
And I sat back and said, wow, can you be that naive? Which probably wasn't the best thing to say because we didn't have a good relationship to begin with. But from that point on, the signs were there. We actually had videotape of students outside the building forming around one individual. We had the gang signs. We had the colors coming out of their pockets. We had the actual hierarchy being set up outside on the sidewalk at dismissal time. We had it all on videotape. And when we showed that, the answer again was, oh, they're just kids, they're just getting together after school, and you're trying to make something of it.
I think the majority of people out there watching feel that there are gangs in our area.
There are definitely gangs. How do you deal with them? Our philosophy always was, you may be a gang member, you may belong to a gang after hours. When you're in school, we will not tolerate anyone taking over a hallway, a stairwell, a parking lot, a table in the cafeteria, you know, where other people would have to be afraid or would know, don't go over there, that belongs to the Bloods. Or that hall, don't go up that hall, that's the Crips. I still feel you could walk in any hallway, in any stairwell, in any classroom in our buildings and not have to worry that, oh, that's Blood territory, that's Crip territory, that's Trinitarios, and they're all here.
And it's important for the gangs to know that they know you know.
That's right.
Yeah, and you know, for anyone listening, I would there are a couple things to mention. I would strongly advise that people go on the computer and read the federal report on gangs and drugs here in northeastern Pennsylvania, which becomes quite an eye-opener, and how, as a matter of fact, the gangs are structured and how the gangs operate, bringing in not only recruiting others to join their gangs, but using local kids, using girlfriends, using acquaintances, literally to help in their drug deals and anything else that are going on. But also, you know, it's one of the things that we have to keep in mind, though, and that you're mentioning here, is the fact too that the security within the schools has its own job to do in regards to the protection and the security of the students within the schools and the school district surroundings, whether they be the fields or whatever. What the police have to do in regards to the gangs is completely different and a separate entity to what is security for a school district.
Yes. And I think we proved that. We proved it over the years that a security department that was proactive was your best response to preventing any type of incidents from occurring. We proved it year after year after year. And many school districts in Pennsylvania took our policies and our procedures and put them into effect in their own buildings and used them till today. You know, one of the things, Rick, we would do with gang members, we'd pull them into the security office at the high school, and we'd sit them down in front of all the monitors, and we'd say, here you are. This is you. This is you at the end of the day yesterday. Here, look, there's the sign. You see the sign you just heard? We're not tolerating that. That's not going to be tolerated in our buildings anymore. And it worked because they knew. I mean, they were cool. They would sit there and they'd look and they wouldn't say much. Or they'd say, no, man, you know, you got it all wrong. That's not what's happening there. We knew what was happening. Yeah. And once they knew that we were able to track them, we'd show them we could track them at the high school from the time they left the door till the time they got to 20th and Lincoln Street. Yep. So they knew that somewhere between all those buildings, they were always on camera. And it helped us. When the fights occur after school, where do they happen? They happen up on 18th Street. It happened on 16th Street. Why? Because they know that they're going to be caught if they do it on school district property. Can we prevent it once it gets beyond there? No. That's when the police need to come in.
Right.
And unfortunately, we're almost out of time. But let me finish by saying, and I think that the key to the conversation you're having at the public, and especially to the parents out there watching, is now's the time, knock on wood, there haven't been any major catastrophes. And again, kudos to you for 19 years. You're going to have trouble, but knock on wood, we've seen that the bad things happen in other school districts. But one of the things is to be proactive. And you know as well as I do that if something happens, that's when the parents will come to the meetings and demand, and that's when the board members will get proactive and say, we got to do something after the fact that it happens. But now is the time that the public, the parents who are concerned need to get to the board members to say, listen, make sure that you're being proactive. Make sure you put the money, the appropriate money in the budget. We understand things are tight, and to make sure you're following that. And again, I think, you know, what you've set in place for 19 years, you know, hopefully someday they'll have a plaque with your name up, because I do. And I'm not being sarcastic, because you really did do something, but I do think you've done a great job. And I will say this too in finishing. the 4 years I was on the board, anytime we ever worked with you and you had to come to a meeting, you were always prepared and detailed with anything and everything. And we have a lot of good employees, don't get me wrong.
We do.
But you definitely had all the facts in place, and if anybody ever questioned, you were always going to be able to answer any questions that were out there. So again, we appreciate you coming here. We wish you the best of whatever next is in line for Mr. Vinny Zola, but please come back, and if you ever have anything to share with us, please do so.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
Dave, good to see you, and we want to thank all of you for watching Inside Scoop. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a great evening.